This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The latest on the coronavirus outbreak as nations scramble to contain in 6 continents. South Sudan's unity government now faces challenges of resettling refugees returning home from neighboring countries. And desert locusts arrive in the Democratic Republic of Congo after ravaging most of Eastern Africa. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live from Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight I'm alongside my colleague Raman Yang, who has our business headlines. Raman.
That's right, Richard. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Hopes for economic recovery in Zimbabwe are fading away. We'll explore the reasons why. And Somalia secured a $100 million package from the African Development Bank as partial debt relief. We'll have the details of those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Richard.
Thanks a lot, Rama. Well, once again, welcome to Africa Live. The new coronavirus has now been reported on all continents except Antarctica. The World Health Organization says for the first time, more new cases have been reported outside China than from inside. Excluding China, 47 countries have reported cases with the total number of infections approaching 4,000 with 64 deaths. South Korea has confirmed over 1,700 infections, and Italy has the largest tally outside Asia with over 500. Iran is the worst hit country in the Middle East with over 240 confirmed cases. Japan has more than 900. Meanwhile, infections in China have increased to over 78,000 cases. About 40% have recovered, while more than 2,700 have died. Over 400 new cases have been reported, most of them in Hubei province, where the outbreak began. Guangdong and Zhejiang and Henan are the next worst hit provinces, each with more than 1,200 cases. And South Korea is criticizing the decision of some 40 countries to restrict entry to its nationals in the wake of rising numbers of COVID-19 cases. The country reported Thursday its highest number of new infections, most of them in the southern eastern city of Daegu. John Kim reports from Seoul.
Another worrisome day here in South Korea as health authorities reported a jump, and the number is now over 1,700 here with 13 deaths reported. Now, the reason for this surge again is mainly due to South Korea's southeastern part of the country, where we're seeing a cluster really forming. And that's really tying back to this religious organization called Shincheonji. Health authorities do say that over 50% of all cases are now related to that one area and that one church. Now, the problem is here is that they're expecting these numbers to continue to rise throughout this week, even though they said that this is a critical juncture because more people are being tested and possibly more are being infected. According to health officials, more than 46% of all infected coronavirus patients, they currently don't know exactly where their infection routes have been. And so South Korea has a lot of work cut out for them, but they are hoping that hopefully they will be able to see the peak of cases happening soon so that it'll plateau and they'll be able to start seeing the numbers go down.
Well, Japan's health ministry says some crew members who have tested negative for the coronavirus will disembark the Diamond Princess cruise ship over the next few days. The vessel was quarantined off Japan's Yokohama port for 2 weeks, and the Japanese government has been under severe criticism for its handling of the outbreak on the ship. Last week, a woman who had tested negative and left the ship tested positive after arriving in her hometown in Japan. The number of cases has also been rising nationwide. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has asked all schools to close from Monday until early April. But how effective can such measures be? Grace Lee reports from Tokyo.
For the past week, Riley Masunaga has been working from home. As the coronavirus outbreak continues to take hold of Japan, the IT firm he works for has made it an official policy to telecommute.
I really prefer working in the office, so it's been really hard to focus. That's been kind of the biggest thing.
Some other businesses have begun letting staff work from home, but for the most part, commuters in Japan are still heading to offices as usual. The government hasn't made telecommuting an official policy. It wasn't until this Tuesday that the government released basic guidelines on how to avoid infection. That includes working from home if you feel ill. It also called on organizers to consider canceling or postponing events, though it's not something being enforced. Critics say these measures are far too weak and that officials have been much too slow in their response to the outbreak.
Basically, we're setting our work from home policies based on what the government is saying. And so the government is saying like, oh, if you can, don't go to the office or don't commute during peak hours. But they aren't really setting any kind of hard policies, or they're not really officially making a statement, oh, you should try to work from home or you should not come to the office. And as long as they don't do that, I think people are going to still go to work.
As the number of cases continue to rise in Japan, the government has found it increasingly difficult to trace the routes of transmission. The northern island of Hokkaido has become a new hotbed for infections. On Wednesday, it announced its first death caused by the virus, and all public schools have been shut down temporarily. But there's a bigger question on the horizon for Japan, whether the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games could be on the chopping board.
There's no doubt at the moment that our total focus is on the Games happening on July 24. Every indication we have from the IOC is that the Games are proceeding, and that's the way we're working. We're not developing any other plans along the way.
Japan's government still insists it's too early to talk about a possible cancellation, but if it doesn't strengthen its response to the outbreak and curb the spread of the disease, there's a real risk that may just happen. A senior IOC member has said that Japan has until May to figure it out. Grace Lee, CGTN, Tokyo.
We're now joined by Natalie Carney in Italy, the worst hit country in Europe by the coronavirus. Natalie, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Great to have you with us. Natalie, what's the situation right now in Italy?
Well, as far as the numbers are concerned, 528 have been confirmed across Italy, tested positive for the coronavirus. 14 have lost their lives with the virus, but we are getting news 37 people here in the Lombardy region have recovered. We're also getting word out just now about some of the ordinance, the government ordinance across the country. 5 regions had previously closed all schools and stopped all public gatherings and special events, but we are hearing that the region of Marche, which is just below Veneto, will open their schools again and return to business as usual tomorrow, Friday, until March the 4th. As well, other regions, including Veneto, which is home to Venice, and Alto Adige, will open their schools on Monday. Here in Lombardy, this is the hardest hit region. They are going to discuss whether they should follow suit and do the same over the weekend. So children in this part of the country still do not know whether they will be returning to school next week. Now, that could indicate that the government is very positive in the way things are going here. However, the numbers point towards a different direction as we keep seeing those numbers increase. We also keep seeing other countries' reaction to these across the European Union. Many more companies are telling employees who have visited this part of Italy to stay home. So we're going to have to see how the situation progresses. Of course, it's something that seems to be changing almost hourly.
Well, Natalie, speaking of other European countries, they are also reporting new confirmed cases linked to travelers from Italy. Talk to us about how the EU is handling the situation.
Well, the EU health ministers and the EU Commissioner for Health has been meeting with the WHO as well as Italian officials in the capital, Rome, since Monday evening, trying to come up with some sort of consensus, some sort of measures that all can implement so that we can contain this virus as best we can. The biggest challenge at the moment is not knowing who patient 0 is, the individual through which the virus was brought into Italy as well. Another challenge is the fact that a lot of the new cases that have been discovered, at least here in the north of Italy, are showing mild to even no symptoms. So all countries at the moment in the EU have agreed that not to close their borders yet. However, again, it is a very fluid situation. And again, some companies are advising, some big companies are advising that any employees that have traveled to this region must self-isolate for 2 weeks.
Well, Saudi Arabia and Japan have announced some major steps to minimize the spread. What are some of the steps being taken by European countries to try and contain the spread, if you will?
Yeah, well, again, I think every country is really looking at each other to see what the others are doing and seeing how reactive their measures are, and then doing the same. Again, once the numbers were announced this past weekend, the huge spike in cases here in the north of the country, communities were placed under lockdown. There was an immediate stoppage of schools, of sporting events. In fact, tonight there's a big Inter Milan game, one of the biggest football teams in this part of Italy, that is going to be playing in a stadium of 76,000 empty seats. So there's a lot of sort of hardline, some people even call them, measures that have been put in place by the government. But until there is a distinct clarity on who this patient 0 is, or a confirmation, a confidence that this virus can be contained and these numbers slow down, we're going to keep seeing more and more regulations and measures being put in place.
All right, Natalie Carney, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your insight and analysis. Moving on, Iran's Vice President for Women and Family Affairs has tested positive for the novel coronavirus. Massoumeh Ebtekar is now home quarantined, and all members of her team have also been tested for the virus. Iran has seen a sharp rise in the number of COVID-19 cases over the past few days. It has reported 245 confirmed cases and 26 deaths so far. Several government officials, including the country's deputy health minister, are among the patients. The Chinese ambassador to Cairo addressed the Arab health ministers on Thursday morning. The meeting in Cairo focused on COVID-19. Arab health ministers say they will work to unify their measures against the virus. They also vowed to support China to face the outbreak. CGTN's Adel Al-Maroui reports.
10 countries in the eastern Mediterranean region have confirmed COVID-19 cases. Concerns are growing after Arab countries are seeing significant spread of infection.
Currently, the transmission of the virus between humans in our Arab world has become an extremely worrying situation. The influenza virus is always strengthening itself, and no one can predict what will happen in the future.
Dozens of cases have been confirmed in the Arab world. Most of them are in Gulf countries who have heavy air traffic with Iran. It's why Arab health ministers are calling for an emergency meeting.
The Executive Office of the Arab Health Ministers has recommended an emergency meeting in Cairo. This is to discuss how to face the dangers of the coronavirus. We will investigate methods to unify measures and procedures among the Arab countries.
The Arab League has extended an invitation to China to discuss the virus which it suffers from the most.
China and Arab countries together will fight this aggressive battle against coronavirus. China will take responsibility to cooperate in the field of health with the Arab world. We will focus on enriching precautionary procedures, exchanging information, experience and research findings. The Arab-Chinese Forum in Health will be the mechanism for this cooperation.
In their final statement, Arab health ministers have expressed their appreciation to the efforts China is leading to contain the virus.
The Emergency Arab League Health meeting will be held during the second week of March. Meanwhile, Arab health ministers have vowed to enhance cooperation between them and assist nations that have been affected to prevent the virus from spreading to other Arab countries. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, Kenya has beefed up its response as the fight against the coronavirus intensifies. The Ministry of Health says it has increased surveillance at all ports and has advised members of the public to take precautionary measures to safeguard themselves. Locust Threat has that story.
Since 20th January 2020, Kenya has screened a total of 320,123 travelers across different ports of entry. This is one in a raft of approaches that the Kenyan government has employed in the fight against the deadly novel coronavirus.
So far, the ministry, through its surveillance system, has been able to pick 17 alerts, all which tested negative for the disease.
The national government has also trained 615 health workers in the management of suspected cases and set up isolation facilities, taking over a new ward with a 120-bed capacity at a public hospital in Nairobi to set up an isolation ward.
The Bagati ward that the government has now taken hold of is indeed a building that was intended for other purposes, and as a national government we took it over because it serves our purpose of setting up an isolation facility there.
These efforts, coupled with a national contingency plan, are geared towards ensuring that the country is prepared to tackle the virus. This comes as a number of new cases of coronavirus continue to rise. Globally, there are currently 81,109 confirmed cases in 38 countries. And as the numbers grow, Kenya has urged Kenyan citizens in Wuhan, the epicenter of the epidemic, to remain patient. Foreign Affairs Minister Rachel Omamo reiterated that the country would not immediately seek to airlift the Kenyans, even as it monitors the situation. The Ministry of Health last week received medical supplies worth 1 million shillings from the Kenya-China Economic Association to help in the prevention of the coronavirus disease. In the face of the epidemic, medics have advised members of the public to remain vigilant, observe respiratory hygiene, and take precautionary measures to remain safe. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN, Nairobi.
Now, 6 continents in the world have been touched by the coronavirus, some more devastated than others at this point. Let's take a few seconds for a snapshot of the state of the world at this hour. In Japan, the government has ordered the closure of all schools and museums for a month, but the country says it is still too early to talk about canceling this year's Olympic Games. The United States is reporting its first coronavirus case of unknown origin. The California patient did not appear to have any relevant travel history nor exposure to another known patient, and that's according to the U.S. Center for Disease Control, which is still investigating just how he was exposed. Italy remains the worst hit country in Europe with the largest tally outside Asia. Over the last week, there was a surge of COVID-19 cases around the densely populated region outside Milan. 11 towns are now under lockdown and the Venice Carnival cut short. And in Africa, Algeria has confirmed 1 case of COVID-19. The 61-year-old patient was identified as an Italian national from Milan. Authorities say they are working to identify all citizens who had contact with the man. And Saudi Arabia has temporarily banned foreign pilgrims from entering. This decision comes just months before the annual Hajj pilgrimages that attract millions from around the world. While there are no confirmed cases in Saudi Arabia, neighboring Iran is worse hit in the Middle East. All right, you're watching Africa Live on CGTN. Time now for a short break, but here's a look at what's ahead. South Sudan's unity government now faces challenges of resettling refugees returning home from neighboring countries. And desert locusts arrive in the Democratic Republic of Congo after ravaging most of Eastern Africa. Welcome back. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization says a swarm of desert locusts has entered the Democratic Republic of Congo, posing a major threat to food security in the country. The officials say the deadly pests have been sighted in the northeastern part of the country for the first time in 75 years. CGTN's Chris Ochamoringa has more from Kinshasa.
The desert locusts are reported to have arrived in DR Congo's northeastern city of Bunia. The locusts have ravaged crops in Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, and more recently in Uganda, where authorities are battling them. Experts warn of dire consequences in the DRC, where 13 million people are already facing a hunger crisis. The voracious insects have been seen for the first time in the DRC since 1944. The invasion in Eastern Africa is attributed to the changing weather patterns. The DR Congo is facing a multitude of problems, from conflict to diseases that have claimed thousands of lives. Chris Ochamoringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Over 2.3 million South Sudanese are living as refugees outside their country following 6 years of civil war. The majority found refuge in neighboring Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. But as the situation in South Sudan gets better, some refugees have started to return home. CGTN's Daniel Arap Moy takes a look at the resettlement and the reintegration challenges returnees face in their former communities.
Over 2 million South Sudanese refugees continue to live in exile. Those displaced now yearn for a lasting peace that will allow them to return and rebuild their country. Since the signing of the revitalized agreement on the resolution of conflict in their country, significant progress has been registered. The political process in the capital, Juba, seems to have brought some positive relief to hundreds of thousands of those displaced over and over again. But their resettlement and reintegration back home remains critical.
The refugees going back needs proper planning. They need first to make sure that the places that the refugees are going into are safe. There is nobody occupying their houses, so that they go in and resettle, and the infrastructure to have the refugees go back will need to be put in place.
The South Sudan refugees will now have to maintain flexibility to adjust to changing operational dynamics of increased spontaneous returns should the peace agreement hold. As these refugees long for a lasting peace back in their homeland, their direct participation in the rebuilding of their country remains paramount.
It's just fair that the unity government involve the refugees, particularly those that have leaders, have organized themselves, get their leaders into Juba and discuss how best the refugees are going to be resettled in South Sudan. That way then the whole process is going to be participatory.
But all said and done, analysts say the international community still has the responsibility to continue monitoring the progress of the Juba peace agreement. For the time being, South Sudanese refugees in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Uganda will have to get by on basic services as they wait for the day when it's safe to return home. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, up north in Tunisia, Parliament has given the new Prime Minister, Elias Fakhar, a vote of confidence. This comes after 129 MPs voted in favor of the government. The 48-year-old premier has promised to institute structural reforms.
Elias Fakhar declared that the state is facing urgent challenges and needs far-reaching reforms in order to revive the economy, boost investment, and improve the social situation.
To restore public confidence in the state, we need to change the government's working method, define priorities and put an end to the fragmentation of efforts.
The new premier stressed that the fight against crime is a top political priority. He noted that the government will impose a zero-tolerance policy against violence, crime, terrorism and corruption.
Tunisians are waiting for action, not words, to improve the security situation and dismantle the corruption system. Our response will be clear, swift, firm and repressive.
The new government has the backing of 4 parliamentary groups and some independent MPs. Another Islamic movement is one of the main allies of the new Prime Minister.
We have granted confidence to this cabinet because Tunisia can no longer wait or support a period of political turmoil and uncertainty. The situation is now stable for the government to work. The new premier has promised to return to parliament with a detailed economic program.
The premier announced his structural project of state reform and decentralization that will allow for the transfer of powers as well as financial and human resources to regional and local authorities.
Elias El-Farfar has expressed confidence in the country's future and urged for unity between Tunisians in order to face unprecedented challenges. The new Prime Minister has the support of the absolute majority at Parliament to implement his structural, economic and social reforms. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, the 10th African Union Commission and European Commission joint meeting has been held in Addis Ababa. The two sides have addressed issues of development as well as peace and security and agreed to strengthen their cooperation based on mutual benefits.
Officials of the African Union Commission and its Europe counterpart have held their regular meeting here at the African Union headquarters for the 10th round. From the onset, both sides have emphasized the importance of this meeting.
We are meeting as partners in order to take up the new world challenges and to find innovative solutions for our collective security and the progress of our peoples. The interest that we give to our partnership should be translated concretely.
Just like Europe, you want to be the master of your future. So there are a lot of common points we have to discuss and where we can find common path towards the future. I truly believe the stronger Africa will be, the stronger we will be too.
The AU-EU Commission meetings have been held between Addis Ababa and Brussels over the past 2 decades. And since the first meeting in Cairo in 2000, a lot is said to have been achieved. Issues of development, climate change, as well as peace and security were among the agenda items of the current talks.
Outside the European Union, the topic of peace and security was an important one. And we both agree, this is my deep conviction, that it is of utmost importance to enable and empower the African Union and the African member states to defend their home country and their regions against terror, to put them in the situation that this is possible, so to empower here.
However, both the AU and EU officials admit there are no definite agreements on all topics. Therefore, further discussions are mandatory.
It is obvious that between partners, sincere partners, there should be discussions. There are issues that obviously have cultural dimensions and even factual, and each one has its own position. It is normal that in a partnership like ours, there cannot be 100% convergence and agreement, but that doesn't mean that we should not continue to discuss and continue to talk, and this is what we have said this morning.
In general, the College of Commissioners of both the European Union Commission and the African Union Commission meet regularly to provide political guidance to the AU-EU partnership. The venue also helps to review progress and improve cooperation between the two sides. Group Tala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Well, the news continues on Africa Live. Time now for our business news with Raman Young.
Thank you very much, Richard. Here's what's coming up in business. Hopes for an economic recovery in Zimbabwe are fading away. We'll look at the latest numbers. And Somalia has secured at least $100 million for debt relief from the African Development Bank. The details coming up next.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. See GTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. The International Monetary Fund says that Zimbabwe's economic reforms are way off track. In fact, it's now warning that without further donor support, the country will fall into a pretty deep humanitarian crisis. According to the IMF, delays and missteps in foreign exchange and monetary reforms have failed to restore confidence in Zimbabwe's new currency. Now, the government's re-engagement with her international lenders on how to resolve its debt arrears have stalled, and that in turn has mostly cut off the country from most debt markets. The Southern African nation is struggling through its worst economic crisis in a decade. Prices of basic goods are soaring, and shortages of medicine, fuel and electricity are worsening by the day. Last June, Zimbabwe ended a decade of dollarization, introducing a new currency, and that fueled inflation, which economists estimate reached 525% at the end of December. The African Development Bank and the African Development Fund have approved a framework of just over $122 million for Somalia to clear part of its debt. Now, the funds will pave the way for AFDB to fully re-engage with Somalia, effectively opening up new opportunities for fresh credit lines. Additional financial resources will be provided to support ongoing and new economic policy reforms too. At the same time, the International Monetary Fund says it has secured sufficient financing to provide at least $334 million in debt relief to Somalia. According to the lender, over 100 IMF member states have pledged that cash. A final decision on Somalia's debt relief program is due by the end of March. The Horn of Africa nation had at least $5.3 billion in outstanding debt by the end of 2018. Representatives of South Africa's financial services industry have cautiously welcomed the government decision to set up a commercial state bank. The Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, announced the plan during his budget speech in the middle of the week. Now, he said that the government would establish a new state institution that would essentially operate like a retail commercial bank. To do so, he aims to consolidate quasi-state banks like Postbank, for example, into a single entity, which would then be a deposit-taking institution. The minister added that the proposed state bank would be regulated by the Prudential Authority, which operates at the moment under the jurisdiction of the South African Reserve Bank. Egypt, on the other hand, says it's committed to US-sponsored negotiations on Ethiopia's disputed Nile Dam project. This comes after the Ethiopian Water Ministry announced that Addis Ababa will not be taking part in talks with Egypt and Sudan, which are scheduled for the 27th and the 28th of February in Washington, D.C. Ethiopia says it has not yet concluded its discussions with domestic stakeholders on the proposed operations of the dam. In late January, Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan said they would sign an agreement by the end of this month after ironing out most of their differences over the filling and the operations of this $4.8 billion hydroelectric power plant. Ethiopia hopes that the mega project will help it become the continent's largest exporter of electricity, but Cairo fears that the dam will drastically cut its water supply from the Nile. The French car giant PSA Group is currently in the process of merging with its rival Fiat Chrysler, and it has reported some pretty interesting results. The multinational reported better than expected net earnings of $3.5 billion for 2019. That's an increase of about 8.7% compared to the year before. Now, despite a 10.3% drop in sales to 3.5 million vehicles worldwide, revenues were up 1% to about $81.6 billion. PSA says its operating margin, which measures underlying profit as a proportion of sales, increased by 0.8 percentage points to 8.5%. In terms of vehicles sold, PSA did suffer from its absence from key markets, the United States, and a shrinking market share in China. But the group attributed the modest increase in revenues to an improved product mix and higher prices, which it said had helped to offset negative exchange rate effects and falling sales volumes.
We have broken a new profitability record. We announced this morning that we are going to pay our French employees a performance and incentive bonus of 4,100 euros. This represents 2.5 months' salary for those with salary less than or equal to twice the minimum wage. And so, we are sharing this wealth with our employees. Since over the last 6 years, we have multiplied by the factor of 5 the amount of performance and incentive bonuses paid to our employees.
Now, a new labor law in California has taken effect. It essentially provides wage and benefit protection to people who work in the gig economy's temporary jobs. Think of Uber drivers, for example. Now, the new law does provide a much stricter criteria for defining who an independent worker is. It essentially reclassifies them as employees with better benefits. Some of the larger gig companies like Uber, Lyft and DoorDash are refusing to comply with this law, and they have challenged it, in fact, in a federal lawsuit. Here's DSTV with this report.
Estefany considers herself a full-time Uber driver, but she says she can hardly make a living.
4.5 years ago, I was getting $1.20 per mile, and now it's 60 cents per mile. So I have a lot of things that I'm unhappy with Uber and Lyft.
Drivers have to cover all expenses, including fuel and maintenance. Oscar's car was struck in a shooting accident last year, but he's not compensated for any of the damage or for the missed days.
Since November, I've been without work. Fortunately, I had some savings, but I've had to use that to fix my car because it's a source of my livelihood.
Drivers like Estefany and Oscar have organized protests against Uber and Lyft, calling for minimum wage, overtime, unemployment benefits, and disability insurance. Starting this year, the state has put in place the nation's strictest classification code for determining whether an independent contractor should be classified as an employee. Uber argues the new legislation does not necessarily cover their drivers. They've filed a federal lawsuit. Last year, Uber and Lyft pledged $60 million on a ballot initiative that would essentially exempt them from the law. DoorDash, the food delivery service, offered to contribute an additional $30 million. Advocates are pushing for so-called rights of drivers to remain independent and flexible.
And it would ensure that all app-based rideshare and delivery drivers can remain independent contractors with control over when, where, how often, and how long they work.
Local rideshare driver unions across the state are joining forces.
Now the challenge is getting local law to step up and really force some regulation on a company that's very accustomed to kind of existing in a Wild West.
California Governor Gavin Newsom said his budget this year will include roughly $20 million toward the enforcement of the controversial law. It's estimated the landmark legislation could impact up to 1 million gig workers in California. Among them, more than 300,000 drivers who hope things will turn their way either in court or at the ballot box. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Now, over in Togo, barely 30% of households have access to electricity from the national grid, and that's far lower than the West African average of 40%. But even if they are connected to the grid, both rural and urban households don't always get a reliable supply of power. Yes, CGTN's Uche Okoronko now exploring how an ambitious electrification strategy aims to bring Togo out of the dark.
Not so long ago, whenever he wanted to watch a football match or recharge his phone, Usman Kancho had to go into town. But a 15-kilometer ride by bicycle to the capital, Lomé, poor roads in the savannah, is not easy. Life was also slow, and many tasks became a hassle. Today, however, there is a sigh of relief for Kancho's wife.
There were no lights before. We had to cook in the dark. But now, thanks to this flashlight, I can cook without difficulty.
Ceiling lamps, television, radio, plugs and sockets now fill their home. This comfort that would seem so commonplace to many is now made possible thanks to a small 50-watt solar panel perched on the roof of Kancho's house.
I didn't have any electricity or TV at home before. I had to watch the games in town. Now I can watch them at home. In the evenings, we meet up in front of the TV with the kids. It has made a big change in our lives.
In 2018, the Togolese government launched an electrification plan for the country in partnership with the private sector. The aim was to achieve 100% coverage by 2030 at a total cost of around $1.5 billion. Alassani Damoni, the electrician in charge of solar panels in Tababu village, couldn't be prouder. For him, the solar panel has been of great benefit to the village.
When we talk about a panel, it's this solar system right here. It allows us to supply the village with power. Thanks to this panel, today Takpapieni village has light and people are very proud of what we have done for Takpapieni.
Only 30% of Togo's land area was connected to electricity between 2016 to 2017. But today, it's close to almost 50%. With renewable energy, the West African economy aims to facilitate the growth of its SME sector. The goal is also to provide access to electricity for its 8 million inhabitants, even in the most remote areas of the nation. Uchiro Koronkwo, CGTN.
And finally, amidst the ongoing coronavirus epidemic, China Southern Airlines has resumed flights to Kenya after a 2-week suspension. The East African nation imported goods worth an average of $300 million every month from China in 2019. China is also the country's biggest single bilateral lender, with $6.8 billion outstanding by the end of 2019.
Dozens of business operators in Kenya, like He Chin-wen, have been looking forward to the resumption of flights to and from China.
This is about 2 tons of flowers to be sent to Lingnan Flower Market in Guangzhou today.
Mr. He had to book the air freight container from Nairobi to Guangzhou 20 days in advance. But within 20 hours, these flowers will reach the Lingnan Flower Market in Guangzhou for onward distribution to other cities from the largest flower market in South China.
This is Kenya's top garden rose among the different varieties. It has a single head and a long head. Each color is different according to the customer's order. The color is natural, it's not dyed. The flower head is particularly large, also an export-oriented flower in China.
Kenya is the world's 4th largest exporter of fresh flowers, and China is one of its rapidly growing markets. While it looks to boost the existing ties, China's ambassador to Kenya reassured Kenyans of their commitment to help contain the virus. Wu Peng repeated his request that all Chinese citizens arriving in Kenya quarantine themselves for 2 weeks upon arrival.
At present, epidemic prevention and control has achieved positive results. Key non-epidemic controlled areas in China are gradually returning to work and production to restore production and living order. Similarly, with adequate prevention and control measures in place, China and Kenya exchanges are proceeding steadily and in an orderly manner, which is of great significance to consolidating the momentum of the Belt and Road Initiative cooperation between the two countries and safeguarding the economic interests of the people and enterprises of the two countries.
Before the outbreak, Mr. He's company exported about 2 to 3 tons of Kenyan flowers to China daily by air. Apart from flowers, Kenya also exports tea, nuts, and seafood to China.
In recent times, the people of Kenya and other countries have been discussing the impact of the epidemic. I am confident that the Chinese government can defeat the epidemic as soon as possible. The resilience of the Chinese economy and the huge domestic demand are the foundation for the long-term healthy growth of our economy.
A considerable amount of fresh produce is exported by air in Kenya. Irregular or suspension of flights could have a devastating impact to local farmers and the fishing industry. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
We'll be there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. We'll be looking at debt relief for Somalia. It's getting quite a bit of interesting progress there from the International Monetary Fund and the African Development Bank as well. So how much debt relief is on the table at the moment? We'll have the latest from Mogadishu and plenty more at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Richard.
Thanks a lot, Rama. The news continues on Africa Live. We've got a lot more coming your way after break, including African women filmmakers in focus as film festival kicks off in Senegal.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival, and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. The fourth edition of the African Women's Film Festival has kicked off in Dakar, Senegal. The event aims to highlight and promote films created by African women around the world. CGTN's Brian Toussaint with the details.
Characterized by the free screening of films, this year's African Women's Film Festival is mainly focusing on promoting women in the filmmaking industry on the continent.
My movie is about fishing traditions in my home region. We are a community that lives on the banks of the Senegal River. Our traditions include fishing through the use of incantations and mystical knowledge that allows the fishermen to catch fish. With modernization, all these practices are beginning to disappear. My film questions the life of these people on the riverbanks. It also brings out some issues that affect Senegalese women.
62 films from 24 different countries have been showcased so far in the event. These include short feature films, fiction, and documentaries that tell stories concerning the African woman.
The aim of our event is to restore our taste for cinema to Senegalese people who no longer use movie theaters. We have free movie screening in cultural social centers, high schools, universities, and even in movie theaters. Through the event, we want to take part in the global conversation on women's rights. We want to awaken the minds of some women who are going through complicated situations. We want to show them that solidarity between women exists.
In line with this year's theme, Women in Resistance, those who attended the event vowed to continue fighting for equal rights between men and women in Senegal.
It's
a very good thing to make a film festival with films made by women or made by men with the themes related to women's issues. So this festival brings diverse artistic proposals that put gender in a central position.
The first part of the African Women's Film Festival will end on February 29th. This will be followed by the second part, which will take place from March 2nd to March 7th. At the end of the event, prizes will be awarded to the best short fiction film, the best screenplay, and the best feature fiction and documentary film. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Guess what? We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a sneak look at the headline. IOC member Dick Pound clarifies on possible Tokyo 2020 Olympics cancellation over coronavirus outbreak. Well, the International Olympics Committee member Dick Pound has clarified his comments on the possible cancellation of the Tokyo 2020 Games over the coronavirus outbreak. In an interview, Pound now says the world's health must be at stake for any cancellation or postponement of the Summer Olympics. He adds it is not possible to reschedule an Olympics for a year later but wanted athletes who are training for Tokyo to know the IOC is fully committed to having them at the opening ceremony on the 24th of July. Pound said, and any decision on whether to cancel or postpone the Olympics had a lot of moving parts and would involve the IOC, Tokyo authorities, governments, and international agencies all agreeing that it would not be safe a scenario to hold the event. He stresses the IOC remains in constant contact with the World Health Organization. The WHO would also weigh in on whether or not to cancel the games or if other options should be considered.
Well, for the athletes, you say, look, we are committed to going to Tokyo so that you'll be on the track at the opening ceremonies on July 24th. And only if there's